Hi, this is Matthew again to talk about my favorite band, the Beatles, which I haven't done yet. I did a top 10, or what did I do? Yeah, top 5, I think, songs video, which at some point will get released, I hope. It has not yet as of this recording. They're my favorite band ever. I would talk a little bit about them since I hadn't done that. Most people know they're a band from the 60s, composed of Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. And only Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney are alive still. As of this recording, I hope they go on for quite a while longer. They are from a town in England called Liverpool. It's a large port city with lots of different workers and all kinds of people that come through. And they're all born in the 40s and lived through World War II as very young kids, which affected their lives later. They grew up, of course, through the 40s and 50s and got into rock and roll and blues and I know Ringo for sure had some country influences, but a lot of blues, a lot of early rock and roll. As I said, some country, R&B, of course, big influence on them. Not as much, some blues, not tons of blues, but more R&B and early rock and roll, and probably a little bit of the big band influences, I suppose, in some things. Lots of music going on around there. As they grew up and started, they got together, started with John, got some guys together, made the Quarrymen, and eventually got replaced with Paul and George. I started in 58, really, I think. Went around and gigged around for a while and got to open for a guy named Johnny Gentle at one point, then got to go to Hamburg a few times. I want to say 3, but 2 for sure. I don't really feel like checking right now because I'll just get down Beatles rabbit hole and I'll forget what I'm doing. So I won't do that. At least 2, maybe possibly 3 trips to Hamburg at different times in Germany, playing clubs there. There is a recording of that when they were at the Star Club at one point. It has been bootlegged many times. There's a rumor they're going to put it out for real. That would be awesome because I have a bootleg copy, but my CD cuts off the last song. So I don't know if it just ran out of CD or if there's more that it didn't get because it needed a second disc. I don't know. It sounds pretty good from the one I've got of it. But I don't know because it cuts off the last song. So I don't know if I have them all or not. From that release that I have somewhere in a box buried somewhere. But they did that. And there they got to know Brian Epstein, who owned a record shop called NIMS. I forget what it stands for right now. Without looking. Oh, I can't think right now. But in Hamburg, they recorded a few things at a studio. And they did one early called My Bonnie, that song with a guy named Tony Sheridan, who was also up there in Hamburg playing music as well. And they backed some of his stuff under the name The Beat Brothers. I know there's been a collection or 2 released of. I found one at the library years ago in high school. They did that one. I know they did Ain't She Sweet, which I think was a musical number. John is on vocals there. Tony Sheridan does vocals on My Bonnie. They also did Cry for a Shadow, which was their tribute to a band called The Shadows, which Cliff Richard sings, and he's kind of their Elvis, sort of. He's still going. His autobiography is kind of interesting, read by him. I know the British have it in their blind library if you can get a hold of that, which I did. It's just a couple of books, but I read the book he wrote specifically. But he attributed that. But they also did several other songs with Tony Sheridan, which I think there's been under a few album titles throughout the years. I forget what the one I found was called. Something like Tony Sheridan and the Beatles or something. I forget what it was called, but they're credited as the Beat Brothers on that. But that, My Bonnie single, which I think, I forget what, it's E.T. Sweet or Cry for Shadows on the back. I forget which. But that, people kept asking for it, and he's like, what in the world is this? So he managed to track it down and sold it in the stores, and he kept hearing about this band and how good they were. So he went down. They finally came back to Liverpool. Were playing at the Cavern Club, which was gone for a while. It's back now. I don't know if it's in the same location, but it is open in some form, I believe, with bands. I'm not certain about that, but I think it is. Obviously, I have not been to Liverpool, so I don't know. Sadly, if anyone does, please comment. I think it's still open, but he saw them there, really liked them, got to talking to them. He became their manager and was with them for many years, and then started them trying to get their stuff out there, and got finally to Decca Records, and they made a demo. They turned them down. They said guitar groups were on the way out. I bet that guy wanted to kick himself later after he said that. That's apparently what he told them. That demo is out in various bootlegs. I would love to find it. I've only heard some of the songs from it, which I'll get to in a bit. But they did have that, and that got to EMI, where they heard it, and they decided to sign them, gave them to George Martin, because they were mostly a classical kind of a classical big band label with some comedy stuff. Not a ton of rock and roll acts on it at the time. They get George Martin. He did like them. Did a few tests with them, and wanted to give them a song called "How Do You Do It" that he liked. They did do a version of it. I like it. They didn't. Early at least stuff from them. They didn't care for it much. Then they said to get one of theirs in, called Please Please Me. It was kind of slow, but kind of went off to the back for a second. They did come in with Love Me Do, which he did like, and they did release that as a single, which got to number 17 in 1962. And then they went back to Please Please Me again. They released it, made it faster, which actually improves it quite a bit. Made it faster to release that. Then that really took off and started their climb to fame. And got to into 63, of course. They put the first two albums out. And they were always, Brian Epstein was always eyeing America. So they did get to go there. And landed at the airport to screaming crowds of people. That was Beatlemania. That started in 63, of course, but it exploded here. And that really got them going. Put two albums out in 64, two in 65. That 65 started to kind of experimental stuff a little bit with the second album. Got to 66, recorded that. They were touring all the way through all this time. Got to 66, and they were tired of it. They couldn't hear each other anymore without the screaming people, girls mostly, screaming at them. And just other people on them, wanted them to do stuff and merchandise, and just all kinds of things were happening. I won't get into that because I'll go on for hours if I do. But they decided to stop touring. Last gig was in Castleton Park in San Francisco, which I guess that stadium is gone now. I know they don't use it. They used it for baseball quite a long time, but it's, I guess, gone now. I guess there's nothing left of it or anything. I don't know. That's what I heard. They decided to do that. Then they went into the studio and really started to work on things and come up with new sounds and new techniques. And George Martin and his guys were working overtime to get things done because you had to make it all by hand because it didn't exist. Now it's just like settings in your recording software. You can kind of duplicate what they did. But they were doing all by hand and all on the tape and all kinds of people looping tapes around down the hallway and into different tape machines. And it's There's a really good book Jeff Emmerich wrote called Here, There, and Everywhere. It is on Bard. It might be a version on Audible. Another was an abridged copy there, which is what I read. But then this came out literally was it a year or more ago? They finally recorded the whole book. And it's way more interesting than the abridged copy. It's 4-hour abridged book was 12 or more hours of stuff, and it was fascinating to read, but I'm into sound. It's not too technical. It probably, you could read it. It's also, if you can get onto Learning Ally, it's over there. They also read it themselves. It's at least in 2 places in full audio form. I don't know if it ever came out as a full audiobook. I've not looked for it. I don't know. But it's very interesting. It goes into a lot of what he did for them. He didn't do every session with them, but he did a lot. And I honestly wish it had been longer. But he does go into detail. They do lots of great albums over the years. You got to the rest of them, Sgt. Pepper in '67, and then they were doing that, and unfortunately Brian Epstein sadly accidentally overdosed on sleeping pills and died. So they were very much without a manager. Paul took over to kind of get things going. They released Metro Mission Tour, and it was his idea, and then the White Album came in '68. Very much it was a double, but it was a lot of less like them doing their own things, but it's a good album anyway. And then they tried to work on an album called Get Back. Didn't really go anywhere. Lots of problems with studios and just them getting along with each other anymore, and people leaving and coming back, and it was a very turbulent time for them. Shelved it for a while, decided to make an album called Abbey Road with George Martin again. Great album. And then, in the meantime, just more them deciding to break up the band, basically, into '69. But in the meantime, they gave the album to Phil Spector, the Get Back album that they were trying to work on. And originally it came out as Let It Be to mixed results. I don't blame decisions he made with adding strings and choirs and stuff. I would have done the same thing because it was just, they were very unfinished and he was trying to finish them. Hard task when it's just hours of just different things and you're trying to get songs together and assemble something that people will listen to. I'd love to go through those archives because I would have added some songs, but if they weren't finished, I would have put them on anyway, just to have some extra songs. That came out, they broke up officially in '70. They all did their own solo things to great success for the most part for quite a long time. Then 1980 comes along, and Lennon is sadly shot right outside of his apartment. That album comes out after he dies, a little bit after he dies. His final solo album comes out. Paul and George Ringo make albums, keep making albums. George Harrison sadly dies in 2001 on the November 29th, right day after my birthday. John was December 8th of 80. Which here locally we have a Magic concert where people play John Lennon and Beatles stuff right around that time period. Sometimes it's on the 8th, but it's usually around the 8th. They try to have it. I think one year it was after. Just because something else was there at in that place at the same time, so they had to push it to the next week. But usually it's around the 8th. And Paul and Ringo are still making albums. In the meantime, in about 94, they decided to make a collection of like just maybe stuff that hadn't been played before, outtakes and stuff. There's an early 40-minute recording of them, That'll Be the Day, In Spite of All the Danger, and there's a couple of other recordings on there from a tape recorder. And you have some of the Decca stuff I talked about, some of the EMI stuff, early takes of other songs all the way through. But at the beginning, there was a tape of just different stuff John Lennon hadn't released while he was alive. And Free as a Bird was that way. And they took that recording, and at the time, Paul, Ringo, and George put their own vocals on it, put their own instruments on it, released that on the first anthology album. That was there. The second album had Real Love on it, more tracks from the kind of the middle period. Then 3 came out with nothing added to it, which I'll get into in a second. They tried to work on a song called Now and Then, but the recording was just so... There's a lot of... It's hard to hear, John. There's a lot of buzzing from his recorder and stuff going on. Could make it work. They attempted it. George did make his slide guitar part for it. And some of their vocals were done. Tried to do something, just couldn't make it work. Kind of shelved it. So Anthology 3 has nothing on it. Just the last half of their career with some kind of other things they hadn't. A few other songs on there that they didn't actually use. Like Come and Get It, that Badfinger release. That's there. A nice version of that on there. A little different tempo. But fast forward to 2001. George died, but after that, fast forward to a year or so ago, AI is becoming much easier to do things with. And they ran Now and Then through that, telling it what things were. It isolated John Lennon's voice where they could actually do something with it, which is incredible. So I know George Harrison's parts in there, his slide guitar. I'm assuming they re-recorded like the guitar and drums and stuff and vocals for it. There's also an orchestra in it, briefly. And actually, one of the people that played in the orchestra died right after the song came out, or right before it. It came out last year on a reissue of a hits collection they made. There's a Red and Blue album, and it's on the back of the blue. They added some tracks to that. That's the very last thing they added. I wish they would have put Real Love and Free as a Bird also on there. They didn't, which is a real shame, because it would have been nice to have had it in another configuration, but they didn't. But yeah, that was a really neat track to hear. Playing on one last time, I suppose. Yep, it's called Now and Then. It's out there in different forms. But yeah, that's my kind of a nutshell of my favorite band. I didn't do nearly have all of what I know about them. I've read lots of books and seen some documentaries and stuff. And other people talking about them in other ways, but just a brief, very, very, very brief history of them. I just didn't want to make it too terribly long, but wanted to at least put something out about them, since they're my favorite group in existence. If it's out, I try to get a hold of it, basically, if it's recorded anyway. But yeah, I think that'll do for now, and I will see you guys in another video.